Why are men reading less than ever? Well, today we are going to hear David Foster Wallace's opinion on why this is going on. And then I'm going to back up his assertions with data and then tell you guys what's happening on the ground right now. Because for the last 6 years, I have been a high school English teacher and I have seen boys at an extreme rate become less interested in reading every single year. And if you guys don't already know, Right Conscious is the headquarters of everything related to David Foster Wallace here on YouTube. So if you guys would love to sit down and binge 50 more videos on David Foster Wallace and do deep dives into his works, his life, and his opinions, there's a playlist down below, and you can do that right now for free. And without any further ado, let us hear from Wallace. My sense is that, in terms of the audience I'm interested in, there are still plenty of smart, sophisticated readers who are willing to put in a little extra work. But I also think that it's understandable, particularly maybe for men who typically have to sit all day and do kind of boring jobs. Reading requires solitude and extended periods of a kind of unusual sort of attention, and most of my friends aren't writers or aren't all that educated, and what they want when they get out of work is they want stimulation, they want entertainment, which TV and movies and the internet are far better suited for than the literary arts. And so Wallace hit the core of the problem right there, because less than 20% of the fiction reading market is men, which is insane when you think about it. If you look behind me at like a lot of the canonical authors, even though they were existing in a time when women couldn't really write, a lot of them are men. And what's crazy about that is when you look at a lot of the more manly authors, when you look at authors like Cormac McCarthy or Ernest Hemingway or even David Foster Wallace, most of the time the gender gap is only 55% to 60% of men are reading these authors and 40% of women. But then when we look at female literary fiction authors, for instance, Margaret Atwood, who is an OG, Margaret Atwood is sick. She has some books that suck, but so do all authors. And a lot of her best work, like the Orcs and Craigs series, features mostly men, but only 21%, of Margaret Atwood's audience are males. And if you look at others like Jane Austen, Octavia Butler, we see very similar numbers. So there's also a weird thing going on there that we'll get into later. And so I want to start out here with a kind of neuroscience background of why this is going on, because men do, because of biology and just the way things are, most of the time have this deeper and more ambitious drive. We get dopamine and feel accomplished in different ways than women. And so when we look back throughout time, it's been relatively easy, even in the last 100 years, up until the 1980s, 1990s, for men to be able to get that out, to be able to kind of check off those boxes in terms of ambition and acquisition. You could easily kind of get a job. And if you maybe couldn't get the greatest job in the world, at least you could be around your family and be able to afford a plot of land. We weren't stuck in these little suburban environments with the internet. You still had to go outside. You still went to the bar with your friends. You were still social. You still maybe got into bar fights. There still was this pursuit of being able to go after women. A lot more men were having sex. A lot more people were dating. If we look back into the past, even in a more repressed society. Now, I'm not talking like the 1700s. I'm just saying, in the early 20th century, and then also just all throughout time, there were these models and these jobs, and men had to go out and do hard work. And so that part of us, even if you're an aristocrat, was checked off because life was hard. Even the most aristocratic people, back in the day still had to experience a lot of hard things and didn't maybe have running water or heat or these types of things. And so they were actually experiencing a lot of pain throughout the day. And maybe because of medical issues, they were experiencing a lot of pain and hardship, which is actually really good for your whole dopamine system, because to be able to function as a motivated person who can sit down and read something like Dune or Musashi requires you to have a sort of balance. You have to be willing to engage in hard things. You have to have done that before, and your dopamine levels can't be super high, because then you can't focus and you're have ADHD. You can't eat a bunch of chocolate, especially if you're not a reader, and try to sit down and read a book or do some other dopamine raising activity. And it also can't be really low. You can't just be feeling really tired and unmotivated and depressed and go and start reading again. And one of the best ways to kind of have that baseline where you can access kind of motivation is to do hard things, because a lot of life is very easy. So the aristocratic people, maybe they had concubines or a lot of things in life taken care for them. So they kind of get those dopamine highs, but then they also have these dopamine lows. But if we look at modern society today, a lot of people just have the highs. You eat a bag of chips, you get to scroll on your phone, you have access to porn, you have access to video games and jobs that, you can watch your bank account go up. There's all these different hits that you get. And most of the time you can avoid pain. So we kind of have this really high ceiling. We don't have that balancing out of it. And once again, if we look back in the day, I'm sure if you went and did a rodeo or were riding a horse or doing a hard day's of work, some of that would be very good. So let's say you did a hard day's work and then you went out with your friends and you got hammered, like you went out and you drank. Well, all day you were engaging in a hard activity. There was no music, there was no EDM. You were going out and you were grinding all day. And then on the other end of it, you maybe partied a little bit, but there was a balance to it. And a lot of the activities that were rewarding to men required hardship. And so now if we transport ourselves to today and what men are actually engaging in, we look at how beautiful and how high definition a lot of these like these movies like Marvel or just any TV show are, raises our dopamine. If you look at, of course, video games, which are insane for the dopamine systems and the motivations there and like trying to get better and achieve in that's taken away a lot of our motivation and it's rewiring our dopamine systems. Then if you look at how people eat, how modern jobs work and how competitive and performance-based they are and how overstimulating a lot of our environment is with lights, people getting bad sleep, a lot of these more physical arts aren't as rewarded anymore. And the ones that are, the ones that we actually go to also most of the time raise dopamine and actually aren't good for focus. Something that I remember, so for a couple years, I was basically dedicated to jujitsu. I was going to community college and stuff, but I was living in Las Vegas and for 6 days a week, I was training 2 times a day. I'd train 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night in jujitsu, do some strength and conditioning and some stretching, be studying film. And even though I was doing a lot of things that were really hard, guys, my dopamine was out of whack because I was activating the fight or flight response every single day. And that was way too extreme. And the same thing with kickboxing and MMA, weightlifting at extreme levels. If you go in there and you're screaming and you're weightlifting, that's actually not going to help you be more focused. Even though you're doing something hard, you're actually, by ramping yourself up, you're making it harder later on to become motivated because that's the new baseline that you have to achieve to be able to become motivated. And I know I'm not explaining this maybe in the most perfect way, but you guys see what I'm saying. A lot of the actually hard pursuits that men are pursuing now are these super stimulating things that take a lot of energy away from motivation later, because after one of these hard days, after you go out and you've been overstimulated all day, maybe you go do something hard, maybe you go do a David Goggins style of workout, you're going to have no power left to be able to read a book very well, especially if you're a beginner. If you're someone who's been kind of doing it forever, then you're doing those things, and that's fine. But we're talking about why the average man is reading less, because I think that men do try to read. I have a lot of friends and they try to read. They have books. Maybe they get through a book a year or every couple of years, but they want to read. They understand the importance of it because they see the smart people that they like reading, but it's a slog for them. And when we look at women and what they are engaging in, they're playing video games less. They're actually eating better than men. And as I was talking about earlier, their systems and kind of their biological axiomatic roots in terms of how their ambition and how their reward circuitry works is different. And so by not engaging in all those things at the same level, they are perfect candidates for books, for being able to read at a prolonged level. And obviously books have an emotionality to them that women can access, easier because they have easier access to their emotion. And so there's just the core breakdown of, first of all, what I think is going on and kind of building on what Wallace is saying, because what Wallace said down here was that he has a friend. So I actually have a friend and he's overstimulated at work. He's an economist and all day he's on his computer and he's reading. He's like reading articles in The Economist or about world economies because he's in the energy sector and trying to figure out what's going on. He's trying to forecast all that. And he's running models on his computer and it's a very stimulating job. And he's having to go to these meetings and do presentations every single day. And so this guy's a whiz. This guy has a PhD in economics. He has the ability, he's actually read a lot, but now he says that he doesn't have the ability to focus anymore when he comes home from work because a lot of these systems, as I was talking about earlier, at these jobs are actually stimulated and there necessarily isn't that hardship there. And so what we want instead is just more of the same. We feel there's this baseline to feel good. So when you're stimulated and you make your what you need to do to feel good really high, if it needs to be, hey, I need to work out and listen to my EDM music, or I need to eat a meal I like, or do these things, then to feel good, then you have to reach that level. So how are you going to reach that level sitting and reading Dune? You're not going to be able to reach that unless you somehow amp yourself up, or you just will your way through it. But the proper motivation reserves aren't going to be there to get it done. And so there's two different aspects to this. There's kind of friends, like people like my friend who are smart, who have read before and have the ability to do it and read all day, but are overstimulated. And thus, when they get home, they want to feel good. They don't want to feel bad. They don't want to do something that's going to be too hard, that's going to lower their dopamine baseline so that they can kind of engage in motivation, and so they can find the motivation to read. So instead, they kind of just keep doing things that feel the same. And this kind of sends them down this addictive cycle. Then on the other side, there are people who have never engaged in any of these things, And their entire life, they've now been playing video games. There's a lot of millennials like this, and these new generations. Their entire lives, they've been eating bad food. They've been engaging in video games and having their dopamine out of whack, staying up too late. And so now they don't have any chance to be able to read a book like Dune. And not just because they don't have the reading ability, because their parents kind of screwed them over and didn't raise them right, but they also don't have the motivation to do it. And so there's a neurobiological breakdown, as best as I could, of what I think is going on biologically with all this reading stuff. But now at the ground level, let me talk to you guys about what's going on in my classes. So what I've noticed is that 9 out of 10 times, the kids in my classes, I teach like 14 to 16-year-olds. The kids in my class, I've taught all ages though. I've taught up to seniors. I've taught middle school. So, 9 out of 10 times, kids of all ages, 12 to 18, the ones that struggle with reading, the ones that don't have the ability to read or are really struggling with it are boys. I'm not talking about people who have mental health issues or mental handicaps or anything like that. I'm just talking about normal everyday student. And even crazier, 80% of the time, the kids who can read, so then there's a group of kids who can read and are reading at grade level. 80% of the time, the kids that get hooked into the novels, because when we read a novel in my class, I'm like bringing this energy. I'm trying to sell it to them, trying to hook them into it. 80% of the time, it is the girls in the class that are into it. And that's really interesting. And I've tried different experiments. Have any of you guys out there read Into the Wild by John Krakauer, the story about Christopher McCandless? So this year I tried to run that. I've tried this a couple times. I've always wondered. I've tried to run that by my kids. It's a story about a boy, about a guy, and there's no really love scenes in there. It's just about a dude. It's about a very manly thing, going in and surviving in the wilderness. And McCandless idolizes people like Leo Tolstoy and Jack London and Alaska. These are very manly things. This is like as close as you can get to kind of one of these modern male epics of a book. And so, I read it with the class, and lo and behold, once again, most of the boys aren't interested. They kind of view it very logically. They're like, that guy's dumb. Why didn't he just stay home and play video games? They don't understand. Some do. Some who've been camping kind of understand that type of lifestyle do. But once again, 80% of the girls were into it because they weren't maybe into as much like the whole go out and rough it in the woods and how do you build a fire, but they were interested in the individuality, like going out there and not conforming and like being yourself, like, which is an ideal and something important to all humans. But when we look at, society and how we're being sold this lie that things are being different, that the world is this more diverse and open place, but we're actually just becoming more of the same, because when you look at all the biggest YouTube stars and Twitch stars and TikTok stars, they are all inside the same box. Their personalities may be different and may be more vibrant, and they may do these crazy things, but at the soul level, they are empty inside. They don't care about the deeper aspects of reality, and when they do, they just throw it to God, like all praise to God, which is an insult to a lot of my deeper Christians out there, the people who are actually engaging in the exploration of archetypes of personal development through Christianity. That's an insult. And maybe they don't view it that way. They're happy to see anybody in there, but it feels hollow to me. It feels like this is just a way for them to avoid reality or avoid the pain of death. And that's not what religion should be. Faith should be strong, and it should be something that's studied anyway. We don't need to get into that. And so they're this hollow creator, these hollow idols out in the world who aren't really encouraging real individuation or personal development. And even though they are now from every single race and gender and ideology and every single personality, none of them are different because they've been corporatized, they've been commodified. If they said something wrong or had any real opinions or soul, they may be canceled. But even worse, people don't want transformation. The one thing you're not allowed to do on YouTube, everybody, unless it has to do with health, wealth, or relationships, unless you can make someone look better, help them get more chicks or fix their marriage or make them more money, you're not allowed to talk about transformation. It's the biggest taboo on YouTube, everybody. You're not allowed to tell people that they're not good enough, that they need to do more, that they actually need to transform in authentic ways. That's not allowed, especially at the high level, because you're called an elitist. You're called a gatekeeper. You're not catering to everyone's individual needs because I have ADHD, I'm disabled, I'm this, I have PTSD. We don't all have the resources that you do. There's a million excuses in the book. And the same goes with reading. I've heard as an advocate for reading, for literature, for hard things, for yoga, for all these kind of taboo things, I've heard every single excuse in the book. But I want everyone here to reflect in yourself and be like, how hard was it for you to individuate? It was hard because of society, but it feels good to do it. But there are forces outside of us, as I've talked about many times on this channel, that don't want us to do that. Because if we did engage in individuation, if men started reading at 80%, if 80% of men were reading fiction, a lot of the institutions, a lot of these big things would start to appear silly. We'd start to question, be like, wait, 20% of our of our budget every year is going to pensions, to people who earn that doing things that were hurting our own country or hurting other countries. Why are we paying these people still? And that's at the end level. The last thing that people talk about, you never hear anyone talk about taking away people's pensions, because that's like a no-no. John, Grandpa Johnny made his money fibbing about the Vietnam War. I'll let him live out in peace. Johnny made his money and has a pension for working with any other unnecessary war in American history. It's okay. We're in a different spot now. That will never happen again, right? That's unethical to do that. There was a contract. They were just doing what they were told. They were just following order. And so there's that angle now too. So we kind of now got, so we have the neurobiological angle. We have the transformation angle. We kind of have this idea with boys that it's not cool, that knowledge, there's a big anti-knowledge sentiment in the country right now because we have money. Our economy is really strong, and you can make money. You can get a decent living with only having specialized knowledge. That's all you need. You understand how to do certain skills, and college degrees and the humanities and being a good citizen is not as important of a thing anymore. We're going into suburban environments and living in these insular communities where we don't have to communicate with people at a deep level anymore, are promoting this at a further level. So we're becoming more divided. And something else that's going on right now, which I think is contributing to kind of the decline in reading rates, is the rise of religion, but a different type of religion, because actually the strength of our reading, one of the something I can commend, even though I'm not a Christian, and sometimes I make jokes or like say things about Christians on this channel about why I disagree with them, something I can commend Christianity about, that I'm absolutely in love with, is their educational system. If you look at how they integrated the trivium into a lot of the private Catholic schools and Jesuit schools, and how great of an educational base Christians had for a long time in our Christian, we could still call this a Christian country. 80% of people believe in a major world religion in America. But in our previous Christian country and incarnate, one of the main ways that people were good citizens and smart was that they had to read the Bible. And anyone out there who's ever had to read the Bible before, it's maybe not the easiest work. It's at times easy, especially like in the New Testament, maybe not easy, but you can follow it. But then there are other chapters where you're just reading about people's lineages or like all this random stuff. And if you actually reading it and you're sitting down and reading with, cover to cover with your family, and you want to understand what's going on, it's like literary analysis. You read a hard section and your dad or your pastor or someone says, this is what's going on. And you make that synapse and you start to grow. And it's hard. And we're talking about dopamine. Reading the Bible, especially as a beginner, as someone who's never read something of that length. I remember as a kid having to read it, being like, holy hell, it was hard. That was hard work. That was hard reading. It didn't feel stimulating sitting in a little group in my dress shirt and my tie every single Sunday for an hour or two in my Sunday school group reading the Bible. Those don't evoke memories of pleasure or fun in my heart, but they were honestly actually very informational. And what was crazy is that like back when we were reading the Bible, like the guys that I was reading with, they were just everyday citizens. Like I remember one guy, I don't remember his name, last name was Hutchinson or something. He was a cop, and he was really knowledgeable about the Bible and like could talk about it and get passionate about it, but he was just like kind of a mellow everyday cop. But I can imagine that if we go back further in time, there was more, and was kind of the argument for reading and why reading was so strong, because everyone would kind of come into class and already had that base level of being able, having read the Bible. And so then you could kind of shoot off from there, because if everyone can read the Bible, then a lot of these kind of novels aren't as hard. But now if we look at these big box religions with the music, with, these big sermons, the fundamentalist revival that's going on right now, kind of this quasi-return, because people are scared to Christianity. I don't care if you return to religion. That's okay. I don't care really what you do, but I don't want you to do it out of fear. I want you to do it from a very balanced perspective. But what I'm seeing a lot of people today they're just going into religion or going into other things, whatever it is, because they are lost, because they are confused. And when you come into something because of loss and confusion, you're not necessarily going to engage with the same vigor, with the same motivation that you would otherwise. And you're also not going to maybe want to engage in some of the transformational aspects and hardship of that. And, one of the classic, hardships of religion is Bible study, figuring that all out. And then also living the principles, which is hard. Living the principles of the Bible or Christianity is hard. That's like a dopamine lowering experience. And so I don't see a lot of that going on right now. And I also think that's kind of one of these contributing factors, that it's kind of a different flavor of Christianity. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's bad. I don't know. I'm not necessarily involved. So I can't tell you on the ground, but in terms of education, from from what I know and what I see with what my friends are engaging in, most of the time, I understand that a lot of you guys are in maybe a church or a group that's very serious, but most of the time what I'm seeing, it's kind of a lack of seriousness in regards to studying the Bible and all these different things, which before there was a certain rigor about it. And there's also been a kind of a closing of the mind because politics have now kind of become infused into religion, into Christianity and other things. Because as a teacher the last 6 years, I've been challenged over 100 times with the books that we were reading. Like I've had parents say, "I'm going to sue you," or "Why would you have my child ever read this?" And I'm not reading anything crazy. I've had parents tell me that I've brainwashed their child because we read Fahrenheit 451 or Animal Farm or even Into the Wild, like all these different, every classic book that you can imagine, even, has been challenged, but 100% of the time, and this is interesting. And like I said, I've never read anything crazy. I've never read anything that's modern or, that isn't considered one of the greatest books of all time from the past, pre-1980s. 100% of the time, the people who have challenged it have been religious, which I understand that raising kids in a religious society, in a religious way today is very hard. And certain things can throw you off, right? That if you have a certain program, but I've always been like, guys, do you understand what these kids are hearing in public education? As you're telling, your kid, they can't read this. Do you understand what kids are saying in classes? Do you understand who these kids' friends are? Not, most of the time, those kids whose parents are saying they can't read this, I know who their friends are. I know who they hang out with. What do you think is being said on the baseball team, on the football team, on the basketball team, on the wrestling team, on the volleyball team, on the soccer team, on any of the teams? What do you think is happening? I remember when I was on a team in high school, what I was saying, I remember there was a whole brouhaha because they were trying to censor me on the team. Like we'd be competing and I'd be talking and a bunch of parents would come and they're like, Ian's saying all these things in practice and they're disrupting my kid. And I said, okay, well, and I like gathered my friends and it was like a revolution. I was like, okay, me and my 4 friends, if you want, we're 4 of the top 5 on the team and we're going to talk how we want to talk, or you guys are going to be, this team's going to be really, really bad this year. When I'm alone with my friends, I'm going to speak how I want. If they want to move away, but I'm not going to censor myself for them. I'm not going to not cuss I'm not like bagging on religion, but I'm not going to not talk about my girlfriend or not talk about the things that boys talk about just because someone's insensitive to that, especially while I'm not in school and I'm doing like a practice. And so that was resolved. And then all those kids heard me say crazy things all the time. And it was all good. And none of them, every single one of them, from my knowledge, are still very religious, pious individuals. And it was probably for the better for them to kind of give them some exposure of what the world's actually about and kind of, make sure they're not living in an echo chambers. But anyway, so it's interesting to note that there's, kind of this idea now that education is evil, that a lot of these things that teachers are showing, and there's like, that's true. If you look at what's happening in some of these crazy schools and what's being shown, that's true. But I've noticed that, and every other teacher I've known, when they get challenged or told they can't say something, it's always coming from that angle. And like I said, that angle, a lot of the time, is the richest of education, is open-minded, does want to talk about these things. When you apply the trivia method of Christianity, it teaches you critical thinking, grammar, logic, rhetoric. And then when you understand the quadrivium, it's actually the greatest way to make sure that someone actually stays religious. Because when you look at apologetics and like the whole arguments for Christianity, they're endless. And if you create a student, if you create a human that is smart enough to understand that, to get into Aquinas and then all the furthering apologetics, if they can understand that and be engaging with that, some random kid in the class saying something isn't going to mess them up because they understand the great tradition of arguing for Christianity and like all the different aspects of that. It's crazy. But if you have someone who doesn't have, that baseline of level, you're going to be scared that they're maybe going to be corrupted. And so there's this push away from education, which I think, once again, is also why men are reading less, because books and knowledge has become politicized, rightly so in some aspects. But religion, in terms of how they are educating, has also fallen. Religion, in terms of how they are pushing boys toward hardship, has also not been doing as good of a job as it's done in the past. And then when we combine that with the elements of hardship that I was talking about before, then we kind of create this whole picture that shows why that motivational drive isn't there when someone tries to pick up a book. And I haven't even gotten into ADHD yet. That's a whole other lecture. And so, what are your guys' thoughts on this? Tell me what you guys are thinking, and I will see you guys in the next video. And I just want to say that I'm not critiquing everyone. I'm just hoping that everyone can educate themselves in the ways that they want to be educated, and we move toward more knowledge. If you want to be a Christian, then you should be moving toward deeper levels of Christianity. No matter what you're doing, you should be growing, you should be thinking, you should be pushing yourself. And that is always good for your dopamine levels and for motivation. And so I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.